Hello again, my little conscripts, and welcome to another Mordian Glory video. Today's episode is going to be a tournament after action report. That's right, it's time for some more dispatches from the front lines. And today, I truly have a spicy meatball for your viewing pleasure. Because I took the Tyranid Swarm into a competitive Shark Tank GT. 260 plus bugs were in my list, and they crashed against the meta like an unstoppable wave. Over the course of this event, my casualties would spiral into the quadruple digits, but the swarm could not be denied. And so without further ado, let us feast, let us gather biomass, and let us scuttle right into this thing. As is tradition, I want to start off this video with a few thank yous. Firstly, I want to say a big thank you to the Northern Warlords Wargaming Club for organising the event. I've been part of the Warlords Club for years, and I go to pretty much all of their tournaments. They host a few every year, and they're always a ton of fun and really well organised. Although, fair warning, the club is a bit competitively minded, shall we say, so expect a bit of a Shark Tank if you turn up. I also want to say a quick thank you to the venue for the event, Element Games. I've done loads of tournaments there, and Element is just a great venue. But most importantly, I want to say a huge thank you to my teammates, because this was a team tournament, and this is actually the third time that I've been to this event run by Northern Warlords with the same team. So a huge shout out to Jack, Dave and Simon for being my teammates and putting up with me whilst I ran this rather memey crazy list. Oh, and of course a quick shout out to all of my opponents who, to a man, were lovely. I did not have a bad game this event, and that really did make it so much more enjoyable. But with all of that said, now let's get into the report proper, and let's start off with the army list overview. As per usual, I have done a separate video deep diving the army list, getting into all of the nitty gritty details about the models and the tactics that I want to use with the army. And you can find a link to that video down in the description below. But for those of you who don't want to mess around with a separate video, here's a quick overview. I was running 110 termagants. Every single one of them had a devourer. There were no special weapons. That was just so that I could roll the dice out as quickly as possible. I also had 120 Hormagaunts. And then I had 30 Gene Stealers. And I had a Broodlord. And the Broodlord had been given the enhancement, which gives him an 9-inch synaptic bubble rather than a 6-inch synapse bubble. The entire army was inside an invasion fleet detachment. In addition to the units, I also brought a metric ton of movement trays, and pretty much every single model stayed in the movement tray. Yes, this did compromise my screening capability, but it made it much quicker to run the army. Finally, I brought a chess clock. I did this because I am now converted to the cult of the clock, but also because I wanted to give my opponents some reassurance that I was going to be able to manage this list fairly. Interestingly, as we'll see later on in this video, chess clock ended up not being a problem for me at all. It ended up being a bit of an issue for my opponents. And with that foreshadowing lingering in the air, let us now get into the lay of the land. So how competitive was this event? What was the terrain layout? What was the format? And what was the player's skill? Well, overall, I can definitely say that this was a bit of a Shark Tank. Well, the event was a bit of a Shark Tank. In terms of player skill, I think every single player there had been to at least one tournament before, and I think actually most people have been to double digits, if not triple digits. There were some very experienced players there that were tearing it up. In fact, most people were using this Shark Tank tournament as practice for an even bigger tournament. I believe it's the ITT, which was in a few weeks' time. Kind of crazy that you're going to use one cutthroat tournament to practice for an even more cutthroat one, but that was the level of skill that was on display. That was the kind of players we were going up against. It was going to be a tough fight. As for the terrain, we were playing on WTC standard terrain. So that means that all of the terrain was pre-placed and it was basically all L-shaped ruins. And it was pretty dense terrain as well. Definitely favoured assault armies over shooting armies. As for the format of the event, it was a 5-round, 2-day GT, and it was a decently sized one with approximately 60 players being present. Most importantly, it was a team tournament. Now, if you've not been to a team tournament before, the pairings are a bit different because teams get paired into each other and there's some sort of arcane magic that goes down where the captains work out who on each team is going to play against each other. Rather than getting into the nitty-gritty format of how it all works, basically, there is some control over who you get paired into, and that can make a big difference because if you've got a list that is particularly weak into, let's say, Custodes, then you can try and make sure that you don't play into those Custodes. It is tricky to do. Sometimes you don't always get the best matchup, but there is that sort of extra layer of thinking and tactics that can go into it. But that covers all of the pre-game preamble, if you will. Let's get into the real reason you're all here. Get into the games. So round number 1, I get paired into James and his World Eaters. In his list, he has got 2 big units of Exalted 8-bound, and then there is 1 small unit of regular 8-bound, a unit of Khorne Berserkers with a mass of executions, giving them fight first. There's a few units of Spawn, there's a big unit of 10 Terminators, which is a really cool unit, and then there is a unit or 2 of Jackals. I'm not going to lie, this was a pretty bad matchup for me. World Eaters are very fast, so they kind of negate my ability to swarm them because they want to come back at me just as quickly, and they've got a tremendous volume of attacks, so they can blend through brood after brood given half a chance. What I was going to need to do was essentially try and feed the swarm in a bit at a time and use my screening super effectively. In terms of deployment, I ended up actually putting termagants at the front of my army, and I had 2 or 3 broods stretched out across the front. I then behind that had loads of Hormagaunts and Gene Stealers, and then behind that I had any remaining termagants. Thinking was that if the World Eaters get the first turn, I can have them basically munch on a unit of termagants, or a unit or 2 of termagants, and then I can get the counter charge on them with my next wave of like Hormagaunts and Gene Stealers. As for the World Eater deployment, you can see that we've got a unit of Jackals, small unit of 8-bound, Spawn, guy on Juggernaut, Spawn, and then we've got a lot of 8-bound and the Terminators in the middle here, and the Berserkers are hiding behind this ruin here. The mission for round 1 was a supply drop, and we were playing on Hammer and Anvil deployment, and the twist was smoke and mirrors. No one really made use of that mission rule. For the supply drop, it turned out that the objective on this side, behind this ruin here, was going to be the objective that disappeared turn 4, and the objective over here was the one that was going to disappear turn 5. So the objective in the middle was the one that was going to be there at the end of the game. That covers all of the pre-game stuff. I've just got a few extra shots of deployment here to add a bit more information. So you can see I had loads of Hormagaunts stacked up behind that ruin back there. You can get a better idea of what my opponent had in his World Eater army that was sort of hidden, ready for sort of second waves and stuff like that. Close-up of the general deployment. And then you can have a close-up of the Tyranid deployment as well, with a few action shots, because who doesn't love a good action shot? And then we get into round 1. So the World Eaters did end up winning the roll-off and going first. This was actually a really big advantage to me because it meant that I would have turn 5 to jump on the middle objective and get the big, like, 15 points at the end. World Eater turn 1, they didn't go full send. They played it quite cleverly. They moved a few guys onto each objective, but didn't go all the way forward. This was because they didn't want me to just basically then to get a big turn 1 counter charge on them. So then it came over to my turn 1, and I basically put a unit of termagants here, here, and here, strung out across the front. Now, strictly speaking, I probably could have got away with doing this with just 2 units of termagants, but like I said, I was sticking to my movement trays because that made the game a bit quicker. Again, I've got a couple of extra pictures here to show the board state at the end of Battle Round 1. And then we are going to start getting into Battle Round 2. Rather unsurprisingly, Battle Round 2 started off with the World Eaters getting stuck in. Essentially, contact was made across the line, and they butchered the first wave of 60 termagants. They had attacks to spare. This was not a good sign. I was kind of hoping that maybe just through sheer numbers, I would have been able to have a few survivors left over, which I then could have pulled back and then over a turn or two, like rapid regenerated or whatever it is, and grown units back in there. But no, World Eaters just went through 60 termagants with a fraction of their army, and I'm in danger. But then it's time for the Tyranid turn 2. And I'm thinking, okay, well, I've stopped them from getting any primary turn 1. There's a really good chance I can actually stop them from getting any primary turn 2 as well. And this is the name of the game. Just keep throwing units forward. Just keep throwing units forward. So what I end up doing is sending in loads of, like a wave of Hormagaunts along the front there. And I also end up sending in some Gene Stealers over on the left flank as well. Now, the Gene Stealers, I put 2 units of Gene Stealers into 1 unit of Khorne Berserkers. But the Khorne Berserkers would fight first. And my opponent was in the new detachment for World Eater, so he had like double buffs on certain units. It was kind of crazy. And those Berserkers just... I mean, we're talking like Gene Stealers that were in Synapse range with real ones to hit on 2s with sustained hits, because that's what I'd gone for my invasion fleet. And I had real ones to wound as well. And even so, I think I lost more Gene Stealers than my opponent lost Berserkers. It was really bad. I think overall we did end up winning the fight. There was about, I think, the massive executions and a Berserker or 2 left over, but we basically lost the majority of 2 Gene Stealer units to try and achieve that. And then I went for a charge against the Jackals here, and I thought, you know what, I'll just body block the 8-bound, because I don't want to charge my Hormagaunts in there, because they'll just get slaughtered. So what I'll do is I'll just move up right into their faces, move block them, and then I'll just charge this unit of Jackals here for a bit of fun. I should be able to deal with like 10 Jackals. It gets, if I can carve a unit out of my opponent's army, that's great. These guys are OC2. It fits into my plan. This is where Mordian learns what heroic intervention is. Now, it may come as a surprise to you, dear viewers, but little old me has almost never encountered heroic intervention in 10th edition. I think someone almost did it to me once at the beginning, but it cost 2 CP, and so they decided not to. You might say, how have you gone so far into the edition without knowing what heroic intervention does? Well, I'm a guard player. Typically, I don't use a lot of things like Bulgrins, so I'm not doing a lot of charging. I'm not triggering heroic intervention almost ever. So I go for a charge thinking, there's no need to worry about heroic. My opponent hasn't got any characters leading these Exalted 8-bound. I'll be fine. Also, he's only got 1 CP, so he can't heroic. Oh, dearie, dearie me. So, turns out that needing a character to do heroic intervention is so 9th edition, and we are in 10th edition. Also, it turns out that heroic intervention is now only a 1 CP stratagem, not a 2 CP stratagem. This radically altered state of the game. Because now, rather than body blocking my opponent, what's happened is I've charged 10 Jackals for a bit of fun, and my opponent has then heroic intervened with a giant unit of Exalted 8-bound who contact 2 other broods. 1 Termagant, 1 Hormagaunt. So rather than having 20 Hormagaunts in combat with 10 Jackals, I've now got 60 Hormagaunts engaged in combat, my entire screen, my entire plan. And there's not really much chance that they're gonna survive it. Oh dear. This was huge. In all honesty, this cost me the game. It's right here. Now, I want to make something clear. My opponent did not gotcha me with this. In fact, we basically did most of the rest of the turn, and then we sort of did this this bit here, and I was like, he went, oh well, do you want to like take it back, or do you want to do something different? He offered me the take back, and I said no. And the reason that I said no is twofold. Because one, it was kind of funny. It was funny that I'd like set up this big plan and then it had just been completely bamboozled. But secondly, and most importantly, it's a great learning experience. If I take this back, there's a good chance that I'll forget about it and I won't have felt the impact of what happens. And so I won't learn from it in the future. And then who knows, maybe in another 6 months I get caught out by it. Better to learn from the mistake and lose a game than to have a take back that is kind of, it's not as fun. So I ended up just wearing it just because I thought that's the right way to do it. I don't want to be wasting time. I'm using the Horde army. It's a great learning experience for me, and also it's a great learning experience for those of you who are watching this video who maybe are like me and Heroic Intervention is a bit of a blind spot. So what happened is, because he Heroic Intervened these 2 of the broods, I ended up losing those 40 Tyranids that were, contacting these 8-bound. And that completely blew open my front line, and it also meant that my opponent actually ended up controlling primary points. So not only did I lose like 40 guys in my return, the fight with the Jackals went fine, I killed most of them, but I lost those 40 other infantry. That meant that my front line was opened up, and now the World Eaters could pour through. So I've got a couple of extra pictures for you guys to show how many Hormagaunt broods were being contacted by this big unit of intervening 8-bound. And then I've also got the picture here showing what was happening with the Genestealers. You can see how they're absolutely swarming those berserkers, but I am going to end up taking a lot of casualties from them. And that's what it looked like at the end of round 2, going in to battle round 3. So to really put this into perspective and to show you how damaging this was, this is what the board looked like at the start of World Eater turn 3. And this is what the board looked like at the end of World Eater turn 3. I think this maybe have been the end of Tyranid round 3, but you get the idea. Yeah, they broke through. Everything came forward, and they shot and they charged and they hacked and hacked and hacked. And by the end of round 3, there was almost no Tyranids left on the board. And unsurprisingly, by the end of round 4, there was literally no Tyranids left on the board. I'm not going to lie, this was a bit of a smashing for the Nids. I think total casualties that we inflicted on the World Eaters was like a couple of spawn, 15 Jackals, and a unit of Khorne Berserkers. And all of the really important stuff just went for it. Overall, I think this was just a bad matchup. I think World Eaters just had so many attacks that they could carve through. But I don't know if it's good news or bad news. I think maybe this was just a bad matchup for our team in general, because not only did I get absolutely smashed in my game, but every single one of my teammates also lost their games as well. So hats off to the majority T3 team, although I do think it's a slightly misleading name because none of them were running armies that were majority T3. Toughness 3. But hats off to them, because they played it really, really well. They made sure they got the good pairings, the good matchups, and also I think they went on to podium. I'm not sure if they came first, second, or third, but they definitely went on to podium later on the tournament. So well done to them. It was a pleasure to play against. My opponent was an absolute gent. And most importantly, I learned something. I learned that heroic intervention is really, really bloody strong. So with game 1 down and a valuable lesson learned, it was time to go into game number 2, and I played against Jury and his Adeptus Custodes, the Golden Banana Boys. In Jury's army, he had 6 units of Custodes Infantry, 3 Custodian Guard, 3 Custodian Wardens, and then there were a couple of the Custodes Bikers and a couple of the Sisters of Silence units. I think one of them had Flamers, one of them had Bolters, and then there were various characters sprinkled throughout, such as Blade Champions, and there was a Inquisitor Draxus in the list as well. The mission parameters were Linchpin, Tipping Point, and Fog of War. And once again, we never used the mission rule. This was another less than ideal matchup because Custodians are an assault army. And really what I want to be doing is swarming and bullying shooting armies. But it's not quite as bad as it was against the World Eaters, fundamentally because the Custodians just aren't quite as fast. So if I can swarm them early, and now I am aware of heroic intervention and what it does, hopefully I can use that to basically tie them up for long enough so that I can pull ahead on points. And so with that plan in mind, we roll off to see who goes first, and the Custodes win the roll off. And their turn's pretty straightforward. They just move forward with a whole bunch of stuff and start getting into position. They are staging nicely. As for my turn 1, I decide to go balls to the wall. Last game, I think I've been too cautious. Maybe I tried to be too clever. I thought, you know what, this time, let's just get stuck in from minute 1 and just start swarming from the very beginning of the game. So over on this flank, I yeeted forward a unit of my Gene Stealers, and I also sent in a second unit of Gene Stealers, and I sent in a unit of Hormagaunts. Now, my Gene Stealers were able to bring down one of the Custodes Bikers and injure another one. But then, unfortunately, my opponent did have enough CP to interrupt, and he butchered basically the other unit of Gene Stealers before they could do anything. This is where I learned that Custodes have sustained hits on a 5+. This means they actually do have quite high volume of attacks. Oh my god! It's happening again! Fortunately, my Hormagaunts went in and butchered the sisters that were over here. I then also charged in against... I think I was able to kill like one of the Custodes from around here as well. I then also charged in with a unit of Hormagaunts here, and I was able to stay within Synapse range. And I actually rolled really, really hot. I was really happy with this, and I was able to kill out of the unit with Draxus. The only survivors was Draxus and one Custodian Guard. My Hormagaunts just went absolutely bonkers on them. And I also was able to bring one of the Custodes Bikers here down to 1 wound thanks to just mass Termagant Devour shots. But naturally, the Custodes were going to hit back hard, and in their turn 2, they did effectively clear the front wave. There were a few scattered survivors, but they did end up taking a fair amount of gaunts and gants off the table. But that's okay. We expected that. That was the first wave. And once again, we had basically denied our opponent any primary points. And so it was time to send in the next wave. And this is what the situation looked like at the end of the Tyranid turn 2. And you can see we are making progress. So this is all that was left of Draxus's mob after that first wave of Hormagaunts went in. Then the second wave of Hormagaunts went in with support from more Gene Stealers. And this Gene Stealer unit led by the Broodlord was actually able to butcher an entire unit of Custodes straight away. That's because my opponent went for a stratagem that gave him like -1 to hit rather than going for the protection against like dev wounds. That turned out to be a really bad idea because I rolled like an absolute crapload of dev wounds thanks to the Broodlord, and I just picked up a whole unit of Custodes in one go. I also was able to send in a unit of Hormagaunts against the Bikers over here, and I reduced those Bikers down to 1 guy on 1 wound. And on this side of the board, I was able to reduce these Bikers down to nothing thanks to just another unit of Hormagaunts just going absolutely bonkers. And don't forget, they are going to be strength 4 as well, because my Broodlord is easily within Synapse range there. So my turn 2 was pretty good. We've picked up essentially 2 units of Custodes infantry, and we've essentially picked up both units of Custodes bikers as well, and we've still got another wave to go in. Admittedly, this wave is going to be more termagants, but we've still got another wave or so to go in. And again, my opponent just isn't scoring any primary points. We're doing it, boys! We're doing it! Unfortunately, turn 3 was a really good one for the Custodes. Now, up until this point, I would say my opponent had been rolling slightly unluckily, especially on his armor saves. Like, I'd make him roll 12 3-up saves and he'd fail half of them. That's why my Hormagaunts have been doing so surprisingly well. This was the turn when his luck came back round. And he just went through me. And at the end of the day, he still had 4 units of Custodes infantry. And that's a lot of Custodes. That's like 20 Custodes. So essentially what happened is the remnants of Wave 2 got swept aside in turn 3 from the Custodes. And they also were able to butcher most of my Gene Stealers over here as well. They did that with shooting, actually. My remaining Gene Stealers, because they're all damage 2 on the shots, so remaining Gene Stealers went over this way and went into the Custodian Guard here, but this time they popped the anti-dev wound thing, and I had a lot less Stealers, and so I only managed to kill 2 and take 2 wounds off another, but those remaining 2 Custodians were more than enough to butcher the leftover Gene Stealers, and my Patriarch / Broodlord was kind of left on his own at the end of my turn 3. And so this is what the board looks like at the end of Tyranid turn 3. The Custodians have cleared away a lot of Scraplets, and the only flank that's still really doing anything is the Termagants down here, but they just don't have any AP, and so they're just struggling to get through the Custodes. Once again, what's kind of happened is my army has swarmed forward and then essentially laminated itself against the enemy army. If you have an unstoppable force meets an immovable object, it turns out that the unstoppable force isn't so unstoppable, and the immovable object is really quite stabby. At this point, the game was speeding up pretty quickly, and so by the end of the Custodes round 4, they had just started carving up the remaining Termagants, and we start getting into the end of sort of Tyranid turn 4. And then we get to Custodes turn 5. So, yeah, the Tyranid swarm ended up with just 10 Termagants hanging around on this back objective. And the Custodes didn't really take many casualties from that point onwards. It was just Termagants just futilely firing flesh borers, devourer bugs into the Custodes, and the Custodes just kind of just taking it. They'd failed enough saves up until that point. They were just passing those 2-ups like no tomorrow. But the game was nowhere near as one-sided as last time. In the last game against the World Eaters, I'd scored like 20 points and my opponent had got like max. In this game, I'd actually got about 50 points and my opponent had got about 70. So we were actually well near each other. With the WTC scoring, I actually managed to get a few points for my team, which I was pretty proud of. A couple of lessons learned from this. Do not underestimate Custodes. Volume of attacks that sustained on a 5+ is really, really good. Also, I think maybe I went too far the other way and I was being too aggressive this time. Perhaps I should have not been charging turn 1 and taking all those casualties. Maybe I should have been moving up and taking charges early on, and that would have saved me a bunch of casualties, because I kind of threw away my Gene Stealers early on especially on this flank. They would have been great for a second wave, because they had no issues going through Custodes, as we saw. So if I was to do this game again, what I'd probably do is I'd have my Hormagaunts up front, and then or my Termagants up front, and I would move them as far as I could and just do the whole sort of move blocking thing, take the charge from the Custodes there, and then send in a second wave consisting of the Gene Stealers, pick up as many of the custodians as I could, and then have the third wave consist of the Hormagaunts, because at that point, hopefully, I'll be able to out-OC my opponent. And I think that there's definitely something to be said here about making sure I practice with this list before I take it to a tournament. I had used it once before at a local RTT, but that was when it was in Unending Swarm, when I could bring back like 20 blokes a turn. And it's a very different list when you put it inside Invasion Fleet. And I was kind of having to learn on the job. Would I have done better if this had been unnerfed, Unending Swarm? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, 100%. It sounds insane when you're running 261 bugs, but I really felt like I didn't have enough models. I felt like the volume of attacks out there is really high. And I think what really this hammered home to me is we've entered this stage in 10th edition. And even though people say that we don't have codex creep or anything like that, I think 10th edition is still an incredibly lethal edition. I think we've reached that point now where, because of codexes and balance patches and mutant field manuals and FAQs and all these tweaks that have happened since the beginning of the game, what's kind of happened is there's no longer the need to pick between quantity and quality attacks. The last 2 games that I have played, my opponents have had an incredible quality of attack, and they've had an incredible quantity of them as well. But there's one very, very important thing that I want to raise at this point in the video, and that is the chess clock. If you remember earlier in the video, I said that I brought the chess clock to make sure that I was keeping myself honest and that I wasn't using too much time in the game. But I hinted that that wasn't really the problem with the chess clock. You see, it turned out that I never had any issue with the time. On this image here, this is my time and this is my opponent's time. Now, what's actually important to note is not only do I have double my opponent's time left over at the end of the game, but actually my opponent had 0 time at the end of the game. In both the World Eater game and the Custodians game, if I had wanted to aggressively clock my opponents, I absolutely could have done. And they both would have timed out around turn 3. And that would have made a big difference, because I probably could have then just skirted around and got loads of points. Maybe not won the games, but made them a lot closer. And especially with the World Eater game, my opponent at the end of his turn 2 had like 5 minutes left. So you might be wondering, well, how did your opponents get so much done in their last 5 minutes? Well, I wasn't bringing the clock as an aggressive weapon. I was bringing the clock as a show to my opponent that, look, I know I've got a swarm army here. This clock is here for your reassurance to know that I've not used up all of your time. But what the interesting thing is when you're playing into a swarm like this, people tend to use, when you're using the swarm and they're playing into you, people feel like they have to use every single attack. They feel like they have to do everything they can to clear the swarm as quickly as possible. And because they've got so many things that they need to do, and your guys basically don't even have a save, what you find happens is they actually time out. And so game 1, my World Eater opponent, no word of a lie, would have timed out. Game 2, my Custodian's opponent, no word of a lie, would have timed out. It was because I said, and I made this clear at the beginning of the game, this clock is here for me, it's not for you. And don't worry, I'm not going to use this clock aggressively. Now, some of you might think that was silly. Mordian, you should have had your time, they should have had their time. True. Okay, there's definitely, I could have done that. But then I feel like, I don't know. If I brought an I suspected this at the beginning of the tournament, by the way. I've talked about this on live stream before. I suspected that my opponents would time out against me. And I thought, knowing that, if I abused the clock as an aggressive tool, that would mean that the burden of dickishness would fall upon me. Because I would know that I was essentially abusing the clock, but not in a sort of defensive way, in an aggressive way, in an offensive way. So let me know what you think about that down in the comment section. Should I have just time is time and sorry mate, you've timed out and I get to now basically win by moving around and scoring everything that I want to score? Or did I do the right thing? Knowing that I thought my opponents were going to time out against me. Did I do the right thing by basically saying, look, the clock's not a weapon. It's just there for player reassurance. What do you think? Let me know in that comment section. Oh, and just one last thing I want to mention before we get into game number 3. This trend of my opponents timing out into the swarm, but the swarm itself having plenty of time, actually continued into every single game. So what do we think about that? Is there a new meta there? Can we have weaponized clock meta, or do you think that falls under the sort of bad etiquette? Personally, I felt that it fell under bad etiquette, but it's a tournament at the end of the day. I'd love to know what you guys think. Moving on to round number 3, and I got paired into the Leagues of Votann. Now, in my opponent's list, there was not 1, not 2, but 3 Hecaton land fortresses. That's a lot of heavy armor. That is a lot of tank. We also had 4 of the Sagittars, couple of the Pioneer units, 1 of the Hearthkin Warriors, couple of the wannabe Terminators, big unit of the Berserkers, and then there was an on-here champion. On paper, this is quite a good matchup for me, but the fly in the ointment was, it was Purge the Foe. So even if I hold more objectives, I don't get much for holding like 4 objectives. My opponent still gets plenty for just holding his backfield. And then he can make up the fact that I hold more objectives by him killing more because my units are way squishier than his. It was actually a pretty tough one. In addition to it being Purge the Foe, the deployment was Tipping Point and the twist was Smoke and Mirrors again. For deployment, you can see my opponent has gone for just a big line of tanks and Sagittars and generally just throwing everything down. There are a couple of units of Terminators inside a couple of the Hecatons as well. So there's 1 unit of 5 in here and 1 unit of 5 in here. And this one's just cruising around empty. As for my deployment, I wanted to go balls to the wall aggressive this time, because I needed to close the distance and start tying him up ASAP, because he's got lots of guns. And as we have seen, I might have a lot of bodies, but I don't have an unlimited amount. So the quicker I can start tying things up, the better. As a result, I basically stacked up all of my Hormagaunts as far forward as I could. I even had my Genestealer blob here ready to just scout move into the middle board here to create a big synapse bubble with the Broodlord. And I actually went kind of aggressive with my Genestealers, even though I didn't do this last game. I went aggressive with my Genestealers this game because they've got scouts, so they can get at the board even quicker. And this was the state of the board at the end of battle round 1. So the Votann actually got the first turn, and they went kind of aggressive. And their reasoning for going aggressive was they didn't want to just get pushed off all of the objectives early on. So they wanted to take what ground they could, knowing that then that would kind of be the line that they would hold. Not a bad line of reasoning. However, it did mean that I essentially got mass turn 1 charges across the board, and they didn't get to hold the objectives much anyway. I think they probably would have been a bit better being slightly conservative, drawing the swarm forward, blasting the first wave, and then dealing with the second wave. But I did see where they were coming from, and to be fair, they drew that line in the sand, and the Nids did not really get past it. So essentially the Votann moved, as you can see, Hecaton here, we've got Sagittar moving here, Sagittar here, Hecaton stuff moving around here, and Sagittar moving on to this flank. I took some casualties from the shooting. One of my Genestealer blobs was pretty badly mashed up because it was something that could be seen, and it had one of the tokens on it as well. But then I was able to just swarm with Hormagaunts. And Hormagaunts move 10 inches and they can advance and charge. And I actually got pretty lucky on my advance rolls, I'm not going to lie. So I got like 4s, 5s, 6s and all of my Hormagaunt advance rolls. And I just swarmed up the board and then just charged everything. And with it being turn 1, even though I think my opponent ended up killing like a couple of units and I only killed like 1 unit, that was fine because turn 1 purge, you can't get more for killing more, and you can't get more for like holding more either because it's turn 1, right? So we actually ended up sort of equalizing on the turn 1 primary. Then it comes over to turn 2, and obviously my opponent's, he gets his 4 for holding back here, but now a lot of his stuff is tied up in combat. Turn 2 Votann, and they were able to do a very reasonable counterattack. The Terminators from this Hecaton came down here with the Berserkers and essentially cleared out a whole bunch of the Hormagaunts on this flank. And you can see the other unit of Terminators over here jumped out of this Hecaton and was able to clear pretty much the units up on this flank. So they have cleared the left and right flanks, but of course they haven't got any primary points for that because this was at the end, by the end of their turn. But of course they still get 4 for holding their backfield objective. But the Swarm will not be denied. I've taken this picture here to show you that this Sagittar is on 1 wound, and so is this one. And this is actually kind of the state of the Votann army as we went into Tyranid turn 2. Because they've been in combat since turn 1, and they've been in combat for basically 2 rounds of combat at this point. And my Hormagaunts have all got lethal hits this game, because that's what I picked for my invasion fleet. I've just been chipping away, and Hormagaunts are even -1, so I've just been chipping away. And turn 2 for the bugs, I actually end up picking up quite a lot of units. I end up getting a couple of Sagittars. I start working on one of the Hecatons. I pick up, you see these bikers back here. I end up picking up those as well. And so I actually end up killing more units than the Votann did. And so not only did I end up getting max points for holding one objective, holding more objectives, but I also got max points for killing 1 unit and killing more units. But unfortunately for the Votann, there was just too many bugs. And this is the state of play sort of around the end of turn 3 going into battle round 4. So turn 3 for the Votann, they push forward with their remaining assets. You can see they've tried to move the Hecaton around here to provide some fire support over here. But there's just so many bugs. These Terminators are getting pulled down one at a time. They're in combat with a unit of Hormagaunts, and the Hormagaunts here and the Hormagaunts here keep regenerating thanks to the stratagem that lets me pick 2 Endless Multitude units and put D3 plus 3 models back into them. And so the Votann just don't have the same volume that the Custodians and the World Eaters had, and so they don't quite kill all of the bugs out of a squad, so then I'm able to regenerate more in. By the end of turn 3, I must have regenerated, I kid you not, like 30 plus bugs. So I was just doing it on 2 units every single turn. By the end of the game, I think on average, I must have brought back 50 bugs by the end of the game. It was a lot. It made a big difference. Kind of felt like how an ending swarm is meant to work. So turn 3 of the Votann, they do a big push, but they've lost most of their Terminators. They've lost most of their units. The Berserkers go and do a whole bunch of damage. But they do end up getting overwhelmed by a couple of broods of Hormagaunts. And then it comes over to sort of my sort of turn 3 where, you know, I countercharge those Berserkers. And I also deploy my secret weapon, which is the Gene Stealers. And these Gene Stealers basically come in here and just blow up the Hecaton. We just absolutely flatten it. And with that unit down, this whole right flank just opens up. Because there's a Sagittar and 2... Sagittar, 1 Terminator, and the on-here champion, surrounded by probably about 70 bugs in total, 20, 20, 20, 10. I mean, they just don't have the number of shots to get through all of that. And then over here, you can see the Berserkers went down under about, I think it was about 40 Hormagaunts, I think maybe 20 Hormagaunts, and another 30 Hormagaunts, I think it was, after everything was said and done. And then these Terminators over here are just being tied up. I don't even know if I'm killing any of them. I think maybe I'm bringing 1 down every so often with a mass volley of like not flesh balls, devourers. But it doesn't really matter. I'm just swarming that objective and denying them primary as best as I can. And just generally being a bit of a nuisance. And so yeah, by the end of turn 3, it was the Votann that had actually cracked, which was nice to be on the other side of things. Because normally, if you've noticed with the first 2 games, it was me that was cracking and splitting by the end of turn 3. But this time it was the Votann. And turn 4... what happens is my Gene Stealers here pick up this Hecaton, and turn 5 they pick up these guys here because they got Defense Stronghold turn 5. And there was not a lot of Votann left by the end of the game. In fact, here is the final shot from turn 5. You can see over the course of turn 4 and 5, the remaining couple of Terminators went down just to sheer weight of bugs. You can see that, yeah, sure, most of the Hormagaunts have now been whittled away, but we've got 20 Termagants here, 20 Termagants here, Gene Stealers here. And I think the only objective the Votann managed to retain control of the entire game was this objective up here. And that's just because I just didn't go after it. I didn't need to go after it. And the final survivors from the Votann force was 1 Hecaton, 1 Sagittar, and a few Terminators left over. And the bugs, well, we still had 20, 20, 20, and another 10 here, and another 10 here. So we still had like 80 bugs left over. But remember what I said, I regenerated about 50 over the course of the game. If I hadn't been able to regen those ones, there would have been a lot less infantry on the board. But I think it's a key part of running a swarm army like this. You need to be able to respawn back in. You need to be able to add more bugs back into the units. And it has definitely made me think that I wonder if going for Tervigons would be a viable idea. Just for that whole, let's see if we can spawn back in. I'm 50-50 on Tervigons because on the one hand it worked really well in this game, but in the other 2 games I don't think I had an opportunity to respawn more than once or twice because the enemy was able to just wipe 20 out in one go. So I'm 50-50 on Tervigons, but I think they would fit the theme of the army, and in certain matchups would be fantastic. And so we get to the end of the game, and the Tyranids have won! Hooray! We finally got one. We won the game fairly convincingly, and I think the final score ended up being 16 WTC points to the Tyranids and 4 to the Votann. So it was a pretty big win. This was a good matchup for us, and this is kind of what I had envisaged my army going into every single round of this tournament, but the pairings just hadn't quite fallen the way I needed them to. And I guess this kind of shows that if you get your ideal matchup, perfect, but if you don't get a good matchup, this list it's not great. I probably wouldn't run an ending swarm in a singles event because you have zero control over your pairings. And for a teams tournament, I think what this list has shown is that you need something that has good matchups, but that if it gets a bad matchup, it can still do something. Now, normally, if I was doing an RTT report, that would be the end of it. But this is a GT. So day 1 down, day 2 ready to rock and cock. And we are going into game 4. And it is time for us to take on the Gene Stealer cult. My opponent was Tom, and he was running his army in a Biosantic Brood. And in his list, he had roughly 3 units of 5 G-Stealers, 2 or 3 units of Aberrants, a couple of units of the Ridge Runners with the mining lasers, and there were 2 in each one of those units, and then the 3rd Ridge Runner with a Heavy Mortar that sat in its own objective. Then there was a big unit of Acolytes with drills, a couple of units with Hand Flamers, unit of Acolytes, and a few characters dotting around the place as well. There's probably 1 or 2 bits that I missed. I think there's a truck in there as well. Probably 1 or 2 that I missed, but that was the gist of it. Lots of Pure Strains, lots of Aberrants, lots of Acolytes, lots of Ridge Runners. The mission was take and hold, and the deployment was search and destroy, and the twist was hidden supplies. There were 6 objectives. That's probably a good thing for me because it means that I've got more chances to run onto the objectives and keep scoring lots and lots of primary. Unfortunately, this was a bit of a funny one in terms of matchup. It really kind of came down to who got first turn. Because whoever gets the first turn is going to jail the other one. If I get first turn, I can swarm onto all of the objectives right from the beginning, and I can keep the GSC off pretty effectively. If my opponent gets first turn, then because he's infiltrated shitloads of stuff, he can basically jail me. And then it's going to take me ages to get through things like Aberrants and Pure Strains and whatnot, because he can bring them back. Don't forget, he can bring back loads of units with his cult ambush points. And so whoever got first turn, it was going to give them a big advantage. And so naturally, my opponent got first turn. And so combining the fact that my opponent was able to jail me quite quickly with a couple of big mistakes definitely had me on the back foot. So with my deployment zone, I basically front-lined everything apart from a couple of unit of termagants, which I spread out across the front. Now, the first big mistake that I made is I forgot about my termagants skulking horrors, where if an enemy moves in 9 inches, they can move d6 inches forward. That would have made a big difference because it could have meant that I could have prevented the jail a little bit, because I could have scuttled forward here and here, that would have meant that I wouldn't have lost quite so much ground. The other big thing is, and this just goes to show how out of touch I am with the assault rules, because I just don't use assault armies. Like, I just don't use them. I forgot, and I do know this one. I do know one, but it's day 2. I'm knackered. Definitely should have had a bigger breakfast in the morning. Probably shouldn't have had beer as my breakfast. I forgot the whole, if you charge a unit, even if that unit then dies, you can still activate your unit that charged, pile into the unit behind and attack that one. I'm still living in the land of you can't, in this game, I was still living in the land of you can't attack what you didn't charge. So what happens is my opponent basically bulldozes through, weakens a lot of these units with shooting, then bulldozes through with like pure strains and aberrants, sort of pure strains, I think 2 pure strains this way. So what he ends up doing is wiping out the 40 termagants at the front. That's fine, I expected that. But then overrunning into the units behind with units of his that had charged but had not yet activated, and then they got to munch as well. So I ended up losing 4 broods rather than 2 broods, which I just didn't need to do. I could have avoided that by just deploying a bit further back. I could have avoided that by doing my scuttling. Just wasn't necessary for me to lose that many models. But lessons learned, and me and my opponent both caught the scuttling thing basically beginning of turn 2, and we were like, oh my god, that would have made such a big difference. But we didn't go back or anything like that. We just went, no, it's not enough time, no messing about. It's my mistake. I definitely should have remembered it, and it's a good lesson learned. And this has kind of been one of the best bits about running this army, is I've been learning a hell of a lot from these games. And this is one of the advantages of occasionally going outside of my guard bubble, just interacting with segments of the game that, as crazy as it sounds, I just don't interact with when I'm running more of a shooty army than an assault army. And it kind of finally made me get it. I know we're going off one here. I need to get back into the turn by turn, but just whilst I'm here, I now kind of get it when people say that assault armies are way more interactive, because you've got the whole like, well, I'm going to move here, well, I'm going to scuttle move, well, then I'm going to charge, well, then I'm going to heroic intervention, well, then now I'm going to be able to do like counter charge, all kinds of stuff. Assault is way more powerful in some ways, but it's way more interactive, but it's also way trickier. Shooting, you just move up and just blast people in the face. But like I said, I kind of got a bit of ahead of myself there. So turn 1, I end up losing the 40 bugs, which I really didn't want to lose that many. It comes over to my turn 1, and I do counterpunch, and I successfully wipe out the pure strains down here. And there's 2 units of pure strains that had come in here, and I wipe those out as well. I don't quite manage to wipe out the Abominant. I wipe out the Aberrants, but not the Abominant, by dogpiling it with a couple of units of Gene Stealers. Now, at this point, I'm actually feeling pretty good, because I'm like, okay, I've lost like 80 bugs, but I have been able to actually kill most of my opponent's pure strains and take out about half of his aberrants as well. And then he's like, just starts bringing these units back, and I'm like, oh, god damn it. Like, I'm killing them and then coming back. And another big thing is I misjudged the distance, and I was just silly about it. I was lazy about it. Again, a good example of tiredness kills. I charged to try and get rid of this, my opponent not getting the primary here. I charged with Hormagaunts forward, and I just sort of slung them in, and my opponent then heroic intervened and was able to basically wipe out most of these Hormagaunts. So I lost 20 bucks. Again, just laziness, lazy casualties, bad mistakes, bad play by me. Because I've taken probably at this point 60 casualties that I didn't need to take. That just shows the difference between just being switched on and being switched off. And so I ended up losing. I'm going through my bugs too quickly, and it's entirely my own fault. Other thing to mention is I had actually managed to jump on a unit of acolytes here as well, and been able to kill them. So I've done actually decent damage to the G-Stealer Cult army. I've taken out about 4 units in this game so far, but I've just lost about 4 or 5 units back, and I'm not able to keep up that rate of attrition. And you can really tell that I wasn't on my A game with this game, because I didn't have any pitches of turn 2. So we've gone straight to the end of turn 3 here. So what happens in turn 2 is my opponent is able to clear away the remaining Hormagaunts here, and then he's able to charge in and clear a bunch of Hormagaunts down here. I'm able to kill the rest of the Abominants, the Abominant down here, but he does get back up. And my opponent ends up staging a bunch of Gene Stealers here, and he brings his Neophytes out here and starts giving me a good old tickle on the on my Hormagaunts that are on the objective here. My turn 2 sees me basically kill the I kill the Abominant again after he's got back up, and I start staging up on behind these ruins. Then it goes into turn 3, and because I don't want to just run out there against a bunch of Ridge Runners. So then it comes to turn 3, and my opponent's Aberrants come in here and start clearing through the lines of Termagants, but I've still got quite a few Termagants left over. He starts clearing through the lines of Termagants, and my objective at this point is to try and just get as many points as possible, because it is WTC scoring, so if I can get some points, that might make the difference for the round. And then my turn 3 actually sees me launching a double Banzai charge. I send my Gene Stealers did work this game. Oh my god, that they do work. So they've ripped through enemy Gene Stealers and Aberrants. I then charge them in over here, and I rip through my opponent's Neophytes that are here. And there's also another unit of Acolytes that have come back, and I rip through them as well. And then my Gene Stealers down here rip through the Gene Stealers that had come back here. So like my 2 units of Gene Stealers this game, just these 2 units here, have successfully gone through Gene Stealers, Aberrants, Abominant, Neophytes, and Acolytes. That's a hell of a lot for 2 units. 2 units for 1 Broodlord. Unfortunately, that was kind of the last hurrah of the Gene Stealers, and at the end of sort of my opponent's turn 4, he ends up clearing all of this stuff out, because a unit of Neophytes come back and just manages to shoot them to death. And then he just brings the Ridge Runners around here. There's a couple of Ridge Runners you can't quite see, but they're just around here. They come around and shoot my Broodlord, and he starts breaking through. I do actually end up killing all of the Aberrants here, just through mass, over the course of turn 4, turn 5, over just mass waves of just Termagant fire. And my opponent gets pretty unlucky on his Feel No Pains. But despite my heroic last stand around the objective, my opponent is basically sat on all 4 objectives across the middle with Scraplet units. And I'm basically sat on my 1 home objective, just waves after waves of Termagants just trying their best to hold back the incoming units from my opponent's army. And in fact, here is a picture of the game at the end of turn 5. Ignore these guys. These are casualties. All these little scrap units around here, these are just casualties. You can see basically what is left of my army at turn 5 is just a bunch of Termagants sitting on my home objective, doing its best to try and hold off my opponent sort of coming in here. I think it's the end of turn 4, actually. I didn't get a picture of turn 5, but that was the state of the game. So, long story short, I got absolutely battered, but I did come out of it with 1 WTC point. It wasn't a 20-0. It was a 19-1. Honestly, though, I think I could have won this game. I could have won this game under 2 circumstances. 1, if I had gone first, I think that gave my opponent a huge advantage. And 2, I think even going second, I could have won if I hadn't been just playing so badly. I think if I just remembered my Termagant rule, if I had remembered the whole overrunning thing, if I hadn't been lazy regarding the heroic intervention that happened up here, if I just played it a little bit more cleverly, I reckon I could have had this one. But unfortunately, my bad play and my lack of tournament stamina, because I'm so used to doing RTTs, definitely let me down on this game. Overall, as a team, we also ended up losing most of our games. I think maybe we got 1 win out of the 4 games that happened. So, to be honest, as a team at this point, we're kind of just playing for fun. And, a lot of the guys on my team are pretty competitive. Like, I think Dave and Jack have both been on Team England at one point. And, they're sort of using these as practice games, stress testing their lists. There was an element of this time we were taking it a bit easier. This is the same team, by the way, where last time we went to one of these events, we actually came second. And this time, we're just like, yeah, whatever, get another round of beers in. Definitely took it a little bit more casually. But it was the first GT of the year. So we were just warming up. This is the warm-up GT, apparently. So here we are, round 5, the final game of the event. And I get what might be my favourite matchup. And it has nothing to do whether I was going to win or lose the game. It has nothing to do with power or how good my list was into the enemy list. I got to play a fellow Tyranid player who was also bringing a big swarm with 100+ little bugs, and who also is a member of the Mordian Glory community. Chansey is someone who is fairly well known in the MG community. He's one of the mods on the Discord. He came to this tournament with his teammates, who are also many of them in the MG community as well. And we had said from the beginning of the tournament, because we knew we were both going to say one, that we really hoped we paired into each other. And so when it came to round 5, the captains were like trying to decide the pairings, and Chansey and I just went, grudge match. Grudge match, don't win, don't put us into your silly pairing mechanic. We are choosing to fight each other. And so that's what we did. It was Tyranid Swarm versus Tyranid Swarm. It was hot bug on bug action. Round 5, the mission was Scorched Earth, and the deployment was Crucible of Battle, and the twist was Inspired Leadership, which didn't matter at all. To be honest, Chansey and I didn't really care about the mission or anything like that. We said at the beginning of the game that we were going to have a bit of a gentleman's game. We were going to have a bit of a meme game. We were basically going to Naruto run our two armies into each other just to see who's got the best swarm. That was it. And so when it came to deployment, we didn't do the whole I'll do a unit, then you'll do a unit. I just threw all of my stuff down. Chansey just threw all of his stuff down, and we just basically made 2 carpets of bugs, and we ran them at each other. And so this was my deployment. Literally, I just banged all my termagaunts down on this side, banged all my Hormagaunts that I could down in the middle, and then wherever there's any spare room, I put the rest of the termagaunts. Genestealer's basically front-lining it as well. It was just a full-blown bug banzai charge. Got a couple of action shots for each army, so you can see here, as far as the eye can see, carpet of High Fleet Kraken, and then over here we can see the opposing Tyranid Swarm. And you can see there's lots of Hormagaunts and Termagants in here as well. Although, of course, Chansey does have a few bigger bugs. He did go down the Turvagun route so he could keep spawning in. So it was full-blown Swarm versus Hybrid Swarm. And this was the state of play at the end of my turn 1. I went quite far forward. So scout moved my Genestealers down to here, moved the Termagants up here, and then sent in the first wave of Hormagaunts. I had a bunch go into a Lictor, and then the Von Ryan Leapers heroically intervened, and then I sent in another unit of Hormagaunts against this unit of Von Ryan Leapers, and then I sent a unit of Genestealers just up here, and a unit of Hormagaunts against another unit of Von Ryan Leapers there. I was able to get to these units because a lot of them had infiltrated quite far forward. And you can see here the combat between the 40 Hormagaunts and the Lictor and the wannabe Lictors. And you can see here those Genestealers and a few Hormagaunts doing what they can against those Von Ryan Leapers. And this was the state of play after my turn 1. So my Hormagaunts were able to bring down both the Lictor and the Von Ryans in the middle, and the Von Ryans on that side. I did not expect that, considering that I think they've got like fights first, and the Lictor's like T6, and I wasn't in Silent range. I didn't think I was going to kill all of those units, but this is when I was introduced to the Chansey effect, named after my erstwhile opponent. You see, the Chansey effect is when your luck is so consistently quite bad that your opponent can start taking it into account for their tactical decisions. There's no way that this Lictor should have died, but it did die when my opponent when I jokingly rolled just enough wounds to kill the Lictor, and jokingly said, well, that's enough to kill it, 1 for every wound, and then your opponent fails every single armor save, and then basically proceeds to do the same thing here and here. Yeah, the Chansey effect was a really big factor in this game. But with the first wave of Kraken Hormagaunts and Stealers taking the beachhead, it was then time for the Green Nids to fight back. And oh boy, did they launch one hell of a counterattack. Termagants, Tervigons, Norn Emissary, Hormagaunts. Across the line, the broods clashed. And we got loads of great action shots. You can see the old style Tyranids fighting the new style Tyranids. You know, Hormagaunt versus Hormagaunt, Hormagaunt versus Termagant. The swarms intermingling and interlacing with each other. One of the big things that I noticed with this game is that I was often strength 3 and Chansey was often strength 4 because he had way more synapse than I did. I've got the one Broodlord. He had warriors, he had Tervigons, he had Norn Emissaries, lots and lots of synapse, giving him that edge in the combats. So this was the state of play at the sort of start of the assault phase for the Green Tyranids turn 1. And basically both sides just battered each other. I lost most of my Hormagaunts here, most of my Termagants here. I think I lost all of them because the warriors just got stuck in. Over here, though, the Hormagaunts and the Geneters actually did a really, really good job of just tying up this flank and securing this objective. This meant that we went into my turn 2. You can see I was able to do a really, really effective counterpunch. So I pulled back the remaining Hormagaunts that were here. Just there's a few, I think this is a little brood of like 5 survivors. And then I sent in my second wave. I think this actually might even be the end of my turn 3. Yeah, I think we didn't get any pictures of turn 2. Basically what, no, it must be the end of my turn 2. So basically my next of Hormagaunts went in and with the Gene Stealers dealt with the Hormagaunts in the middle. And then I just had waves of Termagants here, and as you can see, my Hormagaunts, my G's have just been doing a great job of just tying up this whole flank. Over here, I was able to counterpunch the Hormagaunts that had come into the Termagants, and I was able to wipe out my enemy Hormagaunts there, but I also moved up a unit of the Termagants here as a screen because I didn't want my opponent's warriors to come in and start getting into my Gene Stealers. This is going to be my counterpunch because these warriors are melee warriors. So they're very, very good. So the only unit in my army that can realistically take them on is the Gene Stealers. Turn 2 for the Green Nids, and we see the warriors going to my Termagant swarm on the right flank, just brushed through that like there's no tomorrow. And also there was a bunch of Hormagaunts there as well that also got brushed aside, I think from the Tervigon, and there was a brood of 20 Termagants with the Tervigon. You can see the Tervigon sort of just up here, and they brushed aside my Hormagaunts. In the middle, I was actually kind of secure in the middle now because a lot of the enemy units were monsters and they couldn't come through the ruins. So really it was for the Green Nids, it was all about the 2 flanks, whilst the Red Tyranids were just happily holding on to the middle. We then come over to turn 3 for the Red Tyranids, and I counterpunch the warriors with my G-Stealers. Now, both of these units cost about 150 points. I was in Synapse range here, and I did spend the CP so that I could get critical hits off on 5 to generate as many critical hits as possible, and Chansey had loads of CP built because he's got the Swarm Lord, so he went for fight on death, and he also went for critical hits on 5s, and I think we both spent the CP for feel no pain as well. So these 2 units were fully juiced up and they mashed into each other, and what ended up happening is the Gene Stealers cut down about 4 of the warriors, and in return the warriors were able to cut down about 8 of the Gene Stealers. It was a pretty equal fight overall, and I was pretty happy with the way it went, because even though I knew that my Gene Stealers would probably lose the fight in the long run, it didn't really matter, because this tier war unit could have easily busted open the whole flank, and now essentially it's been made combat ineffective. And you can see the state of the board at the end of my turn 3. I've managed to lock down the Tyranids here. Those Hormagaunts I talked about, there's a few survivors, but there have been 20 there. You can see the Termagants and the Tervigon have done a good number on them. And I've sent another unit of Hormagaunts over up onto the left flank, just once again to slow down the Green Nids. But as you can see, my swarm is definitely starting to thin out. I mean, I've got a unit of 20 Termagants here, a unit of 20 here, a unit of 20 here, and a unit of 20 Hormagaunts, but and like 10 here and a few scraplets. So I've got about 100 bugs left over. But that means I've lost about 160 already. And I've still got to survive my opponent's sort of turn 3 clapback. And in my opponent's turn 3, the remaining Gene Stealers go down. The remaining Hormagaunts go down. The remaining Hormagaunts here basically go down. And going into turn 4, what looks like basically happened is I've won the Swarm off. But what is starting to tip the game quite strongly in my opponent's favor is the fact that he's got big, tough monsters and I don't. And I went for sustained hits this game because I really wanted to win that Swarm off. I didn't go for lethal hits. So I haven't really got much that can deal with these big buggers. And so what essentially happens over the course of turn 4 and turn 5 is I burn the objective here to make sure I get it in the bank, and I leave just enough models on this objective here while sending basically everything else forward to just slow down the Tyranids here to stop the green Tyranids from coming around and taking the middle objective. And I also throw forward a bunch of roadblocks on this side whilst falling back with my remaining termagants here onto my home objective, so that there's no risk of my opponent sort of coming around here, charging, and then maybe trying to burn the home objective in the last sort of turn or two. This was kind of like my last big hurrah, and over the course of turn 4 for the green Tyranids, they end up sweeping aside these guys, and they end up sweeping aside the bugs here, although there's just enough survivors to keep them tied up on the left flank. And the Swarm Lord is actually forced to divert back to here because these Tyranids are going to try and burn the objective on turn 5. And this is the state of play at the end of round 5, at the end of the game. The Swarm Lord was able over turn 4, turn 5 to butcher down the Hormagaunts here, so I wasn't quite able to burn my enemy's home objective. My opponent has sent the Turbogun round here to try and get rid of this objective, but I was able to hold on to it, and I'm still gumming up the works here against these two. These two basically never got out of their deployment zone. They've been just gummed up the entire game, but my opponent does manage to control this objective and is able to burn it on turn 5 with the termagants at the end. So we basically both end up with one burnt objective, and the green Tyranids are in control of more primary at the end of the game. And so what actually is happening is we are within 5 points of each other. So the game at 5 victory points, because I basically dominated on the primary the first few turns, but my secondaries weren't that great throughout the entire game. And Chansey was able to pick up a few primary points towards turn 4, turn 5, but his secondaries were pretty peak throughout the entire game. I think at one point he got Call the Horde and got like 20 or 30 points off it. Do you know what I mean? It's like a huge boost that jumped him right back into the game. And so it ended up being a straight up draw. It ended up being a 10-10. So in the question of whose Swarm is better and which Nid is better, the old Nids or the new Nids, well, it turns out both are just as good as each other. And so with the final dice rolled, the final dust settled, the final calm descending on the battlefield, we come to the end of Game 5 and the end of the tournament. Overall, I had managed to win 1 game, draw 1 game, and lose 3 games. And overall, my team had managed to win 2 rounds in the tournament, and we lost 3 of them. We didn't end up coming completely bottom. We sort of came in the bottom third overall. I've talked about a lot of the lessons learned throughout the report, so I won't dwell on them too much. But just to summarize, turns out that you can run 261 bugs with 0 issues on the chess clock if you use movement traits, although that will, of course, limit your screening a bit. And also, it turns out that the enemy tends to time out into you rather than the other way around, so you've kind of got to be kind of generous with the clock. It also turns out that it's entirely possible for even not super optimized armies to almost table you. 40k is just that lethal, and infantry, T3 infantry, just relying on pure numbers it's a bold strategy, but not necessarily a good one. I also think this is a good example of both the huge strengths of this list and also the huge weaknesses. If you get it into something that just doesn't quite have the volume, it will dominate. Like, I think I probably could have won that last game if I had played super optimized, but we were just crashing bugs into each other. It was a meme game. It was fun, and I'm glad that we had that game at the end, because it definitely was my favorite game of the tournament, just being able to let all the pressure go and just do whatever the hell I wanted. And it was nice to play a game versus a friend as well. But it kind of showed that there was a couple of games where this list really did shine. It could have, it sort of dominated in a couple of matchups, but then it also got absolutely destroyed. It's incredibly matchup dependent. I think that this list tweaked so it was a bit more optimized, and most importantly, was played by someone that was well practiced with the list and knew Tyranid rules and knew assault rules a lot better than me. Could actually do really well with it. I think that this list has a lot more potential than I was able to demonstrate with it, but hopefully there was still some of the best parts of it was able to shine through in those matchups. But like I said, it's definitely not a list for singles. Definitely not. You need to make sure that you've got the rest of your team coordinated, because we didn't even coordinate our list or anything. So the rest of the team needs to coordinate, and the captain needs to make sure that you get that perfect matchup every time. And in that case, you will be able to, I think, absolutely smash it and dominate and get every single win that you possibly can get. But it's very matchup dependent. You can't always get the perfect matchup, and if you don't get the perfect matchup, I think this list does just fall apart. One last final comparison I want to make, which is you running this in Invasion Fleet versus last time I ran this in Unending Swarm. I didn't actually get a huge amount of benefit from running this in Invasion Fleet. Sustained hits is okay, but when it's like sustained hits into Custodies and World Eaters, it doesn't really make a huge difference. When I was able to leverage my lethal hits, which was precisely one game versus the Votann, this list really started to sing. But if you're not able to leverage those lethal hits, it really does have a damage output problem. And if I had to say what I think would have done better, running this in Invasion Fleet or running this in essentially unnerfed Unending Swarm detachment, I think unnerfed Unending Swarm would have done a lot better. I could have definitely, no doubt about it, generated an extra 5 broods of bugs back every single turn. And I just know that I know in my heart that those extra 5 units, those extra 100 bugs, would have made a big difference. Especially if I'd had those extra 5 units in combination with being aware, much more aware of heroic intervention, and being a little bit more on it with my rules. I think that Tyranid Swarm does work in Invasion Fleet, but it sang in Unending Swarm. And I really hope that GW kind of undoes this blanket ban on essentially reinforcements being able to be used more than once per game. I think detachments like Unending Swarm really rely upon it. And it just seems really sad. And it just seems kind of wrong when nearly every single game this tournament, the Unending Swarm kind of came to an end. And the Unending Swarm got tabled. I think that the Unending Swarm should be unending. But hopefully GW will do something about that in the future. Who knows? I don't think every faction should have access to infinite reinforcements, but I think the Tyranid Unending Swarm detachment, between the main stratagem being gone and the surge move being nerfed, it just doesn't work. And I think Unending Swarm wasn't one of the problems in the meta. I think it was things like Crute Jail, and I think it's probably things like Guard with unending reinforcements of things that can shoot the crap out of you. They were the problems for sure, and I think Tyranid Swarm kind of was the collateral damage. Hopefully, GW will make an exception and make it possible for Unending Swarm to be great again. But of course, all of this is just like my opinion, man. Let me know what you think down in the comments section below. How do you think I could have improved? Obviously, I got lots of rules wrong, but is there anything else you think would have done better? Any other units? Should I tone the swarm down back a bit and include more things like Broodlords so my Gene Stealers can really sing? How should I get more Synapse into the list? And should I just go completely the other way? Take all the Gene Stealers out and go for even more swarms, because I could have loads of like Neurogants. And last question, What about that whole like harvester detachment where you can regenerate back into like loads of units? Think that would have been better if you Ripper Swarms running around? Give me your feedback on how I ran this list, how you would improve it, and would you like to see this list run again? If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to go ahead and smash that like button. It really does help with the YouTube algorithm. Any kind of interactivity, commenting, liking, even disliking, to be honest, the YouTube algorithm doesn't differentiate. Any interactivity is great. And if you want to see more after action reports like this, because I am going to be hitting the tournament scene hard, don't forget to subscribe to never miss an episode. Would you like to know more? If so, then please consider becoming a channel member or patron. By supporting the channel, not only will you be doing your part, but you'll also be helping me create more content for your viewing pleasure and unlocking a whole host of perks. You get everything from a badge next to your name, custom emojis, but the big one is access to the Mordian Glory Discord server, an online community with almost 2,500 active members. It's always popping off in the MG Discord. We've got channels for army lists, hobbying, tactics, stories, and even a pretty spicy meme section as well. For all you greenhorns that wanted to see the Mordian glory hole, today is your lucky day. And joking aside, I do want to say a massive thank you to all of the current channel members and patrons. You guys are amazing, truly the lifeblood of the channel. I could not do Mordian Glory full time without the incredible and generous support of my members, so thank you guys so much. And last but certainly not least, I want to say a personal thank you to all of my top tier Patreons. These are the War Masters, the people who have truly gone above and beyond the call of duty. So a heartfelt thank you to Alex Dengal, Bonbon Vert, Lord Pryor, Mark Panconi, RJ Scorpion, Swordfish Trombone, Try Again Bragg, John Stubbs, Nick Walsh, Diesel Fox, and August Barney. Seriously guys, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Your support is incredible and it makes a huge difference. Thank you so much. That's all for now. Hope you've all enjoyed today's video, and of course, as always, see you guys next time.